clowns come out of the kiva. They come down the side of the building, and it's pandemonium. I mean, little kids are running around. I went out there go with my son every year, and they, get my son or different kids and throw them in the river. I saw this one guy, koshari, he puts his head in the river, comes up with a trout flapping on the side of his face. They play football with a watermelon. They can even, they find the fattest tourist, rip his shirt off and do the sumo gut bump with him. So they anything goes.
So I had to figure out a way to invent a vocabulary using drawing as a medium. Why do I do this? Well,
I'm a maker. That's right. This is my joy in life, is using my hands and making things. Yeah. I said, what are you going to leave me with? You make my stuff, I'm selling it? So then I'm stuck with the part I hate the worst, which is selling my work.
Oh, that's funny. That's really funny.
I've known you long enough that I could just kind of assume certain things.
Right.
But how do you get started? Why did you get started? Why do you do this?
Why do I do this? Well, that actually turns out to be something that's really easy about my life, and something that, especially in my relationships, people have had problems with. Because when I was 15, I just was really lucky. I had 2 art teachers in high school that put the clay in my hands, and it was like magic. I just never turned back from that path. And the clay has provided a path for everything that I wanted to do in life. So that's basically how I got started. And to this day, I meet people that are in their 20s and 30s and 40s, and they still don't know what they want to do with this life, this time that they've been given. And they're still searching, and they're frustrated, and they're angry, and they're unhappy. And I've never had that. Yeah. So when I try to offer my, 2 cents worth of advice, I'm coming from a perspective of somebody who's basically always known what I wanted to do. Yeah. And, to offer advice, it usually boils down to life's short, get happy.
So what does your work day look like? When do you go into work? What's your process when you walk through the studio doors?
I always leave myself some functional pieces that I leave out overnight, so that they set up, so that they're in position for me to trim up and clean up and get ready for my assistant when she comes in. So that I can always know. I always know that when I walk in the door, that those pieces will be waiting for me, and those pieces will demand my attention, because that's one thing about clay, is you know, once you take it out of the plastic and once you start putting it in the air, it starts to breathe, and eventually it's moving toward immobility that you can't do anything to.
You have to keep up with it.
You have to keep up with
it.
That's the thing that a lot of people don't understand. You know, friends that want to go out, or you know, women that I've lived with. You know, I'm living with the timing of the clay. Once I start the clay process, once I start the pieces.
I'm sorry, Jack, that doesn't work for me.
Well, too bad. You know, if you want me, you have to take the clay with it. You know, but it's like, you know, it starts. It has its own timing, and that timing makes you aware of, because clay dries out. You know how dry the air is, if it's been raining, how hot the studio is. All of these factors, if I'm firing kilns, all of these factors have to be taken into consideration as, you know, from the very beginning of, you know, creating a piece.
You know, I've had just enough experience with clay to understand what it's like keeping up with the process. I do the same thing with my paintings. You know, the paintings are going to dry at a specific rate. Different mediums have different rates of exposure. You know, at a certain point, you just can't work it anymore, and it's either paint all over it or, you know, I mean, the best times I have painting are when I have to keep up with it. You know, when it's pushing me along rather than me pushing it, and you get that with clay.
I definitely understand that for sure. You know, and because no matter what I do to slow it down, it always gets ahead of me. You know, and so, and that's actually exciting. A lot of times, you know, sometimes obviously you get to that frustrating point where you go, oh, it beat me. You know, but it's, you know, there is, you know, that it's moving you along. And you know, maybe that's analogous to life too, that this path of working with clay, this path that I've chosen, you know, leads me along and pushes me along.
With your sculptural pieces, especially your horses, I see a lot of divergent elements falling together within.
In fact, I describe those horses as a yin-yang poem. In other words, a merging of opposites. In other words, historically, the Tong horses, which is the platform for the other imagery in those sculptures, is a war horse. It's aggressive. It has, you know, it's a yang energy, if you will, and that, and what I'm trying to do is to pacify that energy, to stop that forward momentum into war and aggression, by adding the other poetic elements of the birds, the hand of God, the nest, other more peaceful imagery that sort of, in a way, tames the horse, and then to create that tension between those two elements, that hopefully, you know, allows contemplation.
So all these horses that you've been doing over the last few years, all have to do with taming the horse, the war horse. That's your jumping off point?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, isn't that cool? No, that's wonderful. Now, where do the drawings come in? What role do they play?
Well, I've often said that the drawings are my most intuitive work, you know, I say that because, you know, some of that comes from, well, first of all, the drawings, I started doing the drawings when I was in grad school, and I had a teacher who didn't want to look at any of my sculptures, any of my pottery. He only wanted to see drawings. So I had to figure out a way to invent a vocabulary using drawing as a medium. And I had to invent a way to draw, because I wasn't, I can't draw that exact apple or that exact human figure. And I always felt frustrated by that. You know, as an artist, I felt I had a need to do that. And what this professor, Robert Sperry, great man, taught me was that, you know, I could draw, and I could draw in my own way. And so that was exciting. After, you know, being an artist, not feeling like I could draw or I have that vocabulary, and to discover that was very exciting. And
is your difficulty because of the difference between two-dimensional and three-dimensional? You think in three-dimensional forms, or?
Yes, exactly. And that's part of my drawing, is I had to invent a way to draw three-dimensionally. So, you know, what I came up with was a way of first making marks with plaster, raised plaster on the floor. And it started from, and I still use this as a starting point, from my mold making, you know, and I put the plaster down, and I started spreading the plaster, and I started looking at what I was creating after this, process was finished. And
you're talking about the sheet of paper having layers of plaster.
No, the paper doesn't go down until after. First, I make the molds. The plaster is all spilled all over. I'm raking up the plaster with my fingers. I'm creating all these marks, which are 3D. They're raised, they're relief. And then what I do after I've then taken the molds away, and I have these open areas where the molds were, and then all of the lines all around, I then take the paper down and I do a rubbing. I take a rubbing and I move the paper around and fill the paper with the rubbing.
The rubbing is, what's the material you're rubbing on?
Well, I'm using graphite, and I'm rubbing onto the paper.
Okay, so you're using a graphite powder.
No, I use a graphite cube.
And you're just doing this over the plaster that's sitting on top.
And it takes an impression.
Okay.
And then and so a lot of that is like kind of a dance. And then I put that up on the wall, and I start erasing out, and then eventually I'll capture an image. And because I do the drawings a lot of times when I'm traveling, as a way to, that started because I can't always like sit on a beach or, for hours on end, or sometimes I need a break from being constantly on the move, and I'll find a nice place, and I'll find images in the world or in nature or in the strange place that I happen to be, that I bring back in a sort of, by containing those in my consciousness as I start to work on the paper, and then that usually works its way into the drawings. So,
well, these look like line drawings to me.
They are.
What you're describing is something a lot more complicated.
Uh-huh.
So how do you explain that?
Well, they are line drawings, and they are flat, but what when I study them, when I look at them, I see a lot more going on. I can find depth in them, even though they seem pretty basic.
You know, it's strange. I never, I've known you for almost 30 years. I never think of you as a poet until you start talking about it. What role does the writing play in the sculpture?
Well, like I said, you know, the writing was the first way that I started to express myself. And I do think that the play of imagery that comes out of the writing and plays into the poetry of, you know, the titles of the pieces, which, you know, sometimes is just, you know, is that tale or that beginning that you need in order to start the creative process on a piece. And sometimes it's the other way around. Sometimes it's the end. Sometimes it's the period that actually defines a piece. And I think to be able to put words to an image is very important. And then to find those images, you know, in the world, and you know, to express those and share. The thematic thing is unifying my whole process. In other words, you know, everything that I do all circles back in on itself. So, you know, even though the drawings originate from the creation of the molds, which is the beginning point for the sculptures, it then spins off and becomes its own thing. And everything relates back to the basic shapes that I use in everything. And, you know, and I...
What do you mean in everything?
Well, in the same shapes in the functional work as the same shapes in the sculptures as the same shapes you're gonna find in the drawings.
Mm-hmm. You were talking about getting into a drawing and finding suddenly it becomes something. Right. You see it fall in. That entry point is what we're all after.
Right.
That's and you don't want to do it by rote. You know, you see commercial artists that have gotten a technique and a system down, and they just do that over and over again. But people who really value the experience of being an artist are always searching for that unique way into an image, into an object. You're not a narcissist. I'll tell you that now. You can take my word for it.
I hope not. That would be really disturbing to me if I came off like that. And that's, you know, one of the things when you start talking about ego and you start talking about being an artist that you know, I don't want to fall into that, you know, that trap or come off like that.
But what we do is important. And what we as artists do is important in and of itself for itself.
Exactly, which is not to say that what anybody does, you know, I mean, I used to have a real problem with people who, you know, they call everything an art. And I say, well, then who am I? You're taking who I define myself as, and you're putting it the art of cooking, the art of floor sweeping, or, you know, everything. But there is a certain truth in that if anything that anybody does that they spend their time at, if they do the best and the best that they can, that is also connected to that evolution of humans, you know, that is always, you know, trying to do the best. Mm-hmm. In terms of, I believe that artists and creative thinkers are at the edge of a blade of our evolution. And so, you know, what is the very best of who we are is that constantly pushing forward for the new, for something else.
Yeah.
And
you were talking about getting into a drawing.
You know, the big thing is to keep your confidence up, and, you know, to believe in yourself. I mean, you know, that is an aspect of being an artist that really, I think, disturbs a lot of people. You know, they want to, you know, you can come off as an egomaniac, or totally self-centered.
Because you're keeping your confidence up in your own work and your own value.
Exactly. I believe that artists have to have a strong ego, because in a lot of ways a lot of times that's the only thing that's going to get you through. You're going to face rejection after rejection, and you're going to be working on a piece for hours and hours and go, God, what am I doing? This is like a waste of time. But you have to believe in yourself ultimately. And so that means having a bit of an ego. Now, throwing that ego around, that's problematic, or, not caring for other people, or not being able to love because your ego's in the way, that's a problem. And, so that's something different.
We're not all privileged enough to have those great teachers like you and I did in high school that just get us on the road,
right?
That put us on the road. Very few of us really in the vast world, very small percentage actually have the privilege of starting out young as artists and pursuing that throughout their lives.
That's what's surprising to me, is how really it is somewhat of a rarity. People do spend, and I'm not saying that you can't be several things in your life, but as long as there's it's something you want to do, something that you have a sense of accomplishing, as opposed to something that you absolutely have to do, or something that's being forced on you. Yeah.
I always thought I would like to be a Renaissance man, and play the piano and sing and act and write books, and unfortunately I've found that the only thing I can really do is this one focus thing well.
Well, I think that there's each century only produces a few geniuses, and
we're two of them.
No, and most of us only have 2 or 3 really good ideas, and those, if they're good ideas, they can take a lifetime to explore, and that's fine. Yeah. Whereas a genius can jump like a Picasso can, just constantly be, doing something else or something new, and those people are rare.